All right, so this is like our third part of the series of giving you guys a little training for the overall process of creating content for your radio show for KEPW. And we're talking about interviews at this point, and I think that there's several different things that you can do for interviews. Obviously, there's a certain amount that you definitely want to do for prep. Maybe if you mute your thing, unless you need to talk, Sammy, and you will get a
Yeah,
cleaner
one second.
audio. So I would say that you want to sit down and figure out a list of people that you might potentially be interested in interviewing. And sometimes I even include, when I'm working with other youth, I ask them, what do you think is interesting, both for a person that they might be interested, but also topics, and then kind of use that as a means for brainstorming. These are the things that interest me, and who in our community to start with, and then maybe even farther out, because you can do remote interviews, who would be the right people that you would want to interview on those topics. And so that's kind of how I start out the youth, and then, get online, figure out contact information. If you don't know the person already, sometimes you already have contact information. And then maybe if you have trouble finding it online, also always remember the people in your life that might be great network possibilities for knowing either how to reach the person that you've already thought of, or if it's about a topic, sometimes you haven't thought of somebody, and if you know people involved in that and they're not already like the person you would choose as the interview, or even if they are, you could ask them, who do you think would be really good for this topic? And so that's a nice way to kind of broaden your horizons for who you might have not even thought of you would want to do an interview with. And so then basically, once you kind of figure out who they are and how to get their contact information, networking is good for that too. Like if you can't find their contact information online, maybe there's somebody who knows how to contact them, and you can ask people personally, this old-fashioned way to do things. And so then basically you're to the place where you have the contact information. Definitely recommend a little research, when you like, for example, you're going to interview somebody who wrote a book. It's good to at least know a bit about the book. If not, read the whole thing, read at least parts of it, and that's just an example. If somebody's involved with an organization, go to their website and figure out a little bit more about their organization so that you know what kind of questions you might want to ask. And that's a great way to brainstorm the next part of prep, which would be figuring out questions. And what I like to do is two things. One is to, when you ask somebody if they can give you an interview, ask them if they have questions that they'd like to be asked. It's actually a really useful thing to do, because sometimes they have things going on that you don't really know about, and there's certain things that they want to tell you about, and if you don't know to ask them about it, you may never get that from their interview, um, until the very last question, which that's kind of skipping ahead a little, but always end your interview with, is there something else you'd like to share? So you always give that person an opportunity to do that, both before the interview by giving you questions if they have some they'd like to be asked specifically, and also at the end of the interview, just that open-ended question. And so then I just, brainstorming questions. I would always start by thinking, if I was a listener and knew nothing about what I was about to share, how would I be able to ask a question that would kind of be like that introduction to the topic or the introduction to the person you're interviewing, so that they not only get, you starting your interview by saying, hi, I'm with Citywide on Last Voices, but also and I'm here with so and so that directs such and such. But then you give them a question that can really open it up for them to say something about their program or say something about their book, or whatever the topic is. So an example of that, I would say, would be like, you're involved with Citywide. So I would say, I'm here with Sammy, and she's the director of Citywide. And we would like to start by asking you, what is Citywide about? What do you do in your organization? And that is just a really great way to make it so that right off the top, a listener instantly gets to know what it is they're getting ready to learn about or hear about. If you're talking about a campaign, somebody's involved with something as a particular project, let's say Licenses for All. So then you'd say, can you tell us more about the campaign that you're working on? So you might start with, what is your organization about? And then you might even back that up with a secondary question. What is this campaign that you're working on? So you start by giving that overview, and you kind of narrow it down to some of the more specific things that you're wanting to really get information about. And then there's a lot of great questions. I like to always ask questions like, one thing I should say that is super important about asking questions is not asking yes or no questions. So you don't want to say, have you ever had such and such experience? And then somebody says yes or no. And then that's the end of the answer. So what you want to do is you want to say, if you've ever had this experience, can you tell us what that was like? Right? So you really are getting more information. So you want to ask open-ended questions that invite them to really be able to say something. If you're on a strict schedule, like this is supposed to be over in this short amount of time, whatever your interview is, it's kind of nice to even figure out, I have this many questions. You may say to somebody, we would like to give you 2 minutes to say an answer to this, and I don't usually do my interviews like that because I don't like people to feel like they're in a box so much. But if it's necessary, it's good to consider that, depending on what kind of interview you're doing. Some of them are meant to be, everything you want to know in 3 minutes, which technically shorter interviews are nice because we're in an interesting time in the world where people expect their information to come through faster. When you're on the radio, not everybody's going to be there for the whole show. Sometimes people show up later, sometimes people show up sooner. So, uh, sometimes people leave before they've actually finished hearing. So to a certain degree, you want to get a certain amount of information out in a timely way, so that you don't lose people. I would say, let me think, what are some other tips that I could give for interviewing? I occasionally, it is not bad to repeat yourself. So when somebody gives a bunch of information, especially if there's something pertinent there, um, saying, as an interviewer, you can repeat kind of what's being said, to a certain degree. And it's a great way to communicate too, because then if for some reason you misunderstood something, listeners may have misunderstood it too. So it gives you the opportunity to kind of be like, let me make sure I understand this right. This is what you guys are trying to do. And then if somebody missed the beginning of the conversation, guess what? They just got a second recap. and if they didn't quite understand it, they've got a better understanding because you're kind of, giving that information again. And if it was misunderstood by you, then it's it's good because you can actually have that person correct it. And most likely, if you misunderstood it, somebody else probably did too. So, so I recommend people come in occasionally with, reminding people you're listening to Citywide uh, on KEPW 97.3 FM. And, our show plays every week at such and such a times is kind of nice. Especially if you could hear this interview, if you missed part of this interview, you can hear it again, either at a separate time this week. You could know that, of course, that information, and then say that, or direct them to a Facebook page or a website that you might be reposting things. Definitely always ask your interviewee how can people get involved? How can people contact you? What is the best thing for someone to do? One of the important things that you got to keep in mind with the radio station is that you cannot tell people what to do. So you cannot say, go vote right now, please God. You have to say, the polls are open. It's the best time to go down there. I'm headed down there right now. I think everybody should do this if you can possibly find the time, or whatever. So basically, there's a lot of different ways to say things. And so you can say things in a way that really, almost anything that you can tell somebody, go to your local city council meeting, you can say, the local city council meeting is at such and such a place, and the more people there, the better. You see what I'm saying? So there's almost always a way to say it that is not what they call a call to action, which is illegal on non-commercial stations. So you cannot tell people what to do. And I think there's even some rules about it on commercial radio. So that's important. The language, of course, you're on our station, no profanity. Uh, Trying to think. You have any questions? Maybe I should open it up for a question or two.
No, I think it was just remembering I completely forgot about those yes and no questions, about not asking those and doing more open-ended questions. So you basically answered that question for like I was
Nice,
thinking of
nice.
questions as you were explaining it, but you kind of hit all of them. I don't have any questions though. I think I'm pretty good.
Sweet,
Um,
sweet. I think that I covered. I was trying to cover all the bases.
yeah.
I bet you anything when this is over, I'll think of some more stuff. But it's the basics. The basics of what it takes. I recommend that you always send a thank you afterwards to anybody that gives you an interview, write them back and say thank you so much. If you have a recording, send them the recording of their interview. People really appreciate that. Uh, and basically, just uh, always end, of course, by thanking them and expressing appreciation for your listeners is nice too. Thanks for listening, and then post announcing more or less saying, you've been listening to Citywide at KEPW. Is really nice. And any important things, if there's a phone number or a website address, if somebody gives that information, it's really great to give it more than once during a show. So often when I have, if you're recording like an announcement or a news segment, I always have youth give the phone number and then say that is, and repeat it, and and for the website too, so that if somebody is really interested and they really want that information, it's nice when you're listening to to confirm that you wrote down the right thing, or give you time to write down something down, so it's kind of you dual purpose to be
Mhm.
able to make sure people get a date. A date is really important to say more than once. And one thing I recommend is that if you're going to play a show more than once, which I would always plan to, because even when you don't plan to, sometimes you don't get something done, and that show ends up repeating. So when it's a date for an event or something, say the actual date, not just this Monday or tomorrow. Be sure to say the actual date. And that way people know what they're hearing. Because if you say Monday, they might be like, I hope this isn't an old show. Is this really this Monday? you know?
Mm.
And so it's important, particularly on our station, because we do let people repeat things sometimes. We can't keep track of all of our producers all the time to make sure. And so people are used to kind of understanding in community radio in general. I don't think we're special in this way.
Mhm.
That in community radio, they might be listening to something that isn't as current. And if that's the case, you for sure want to say the date. It just really helps their listener know what they're looking, hearing, and not looking, hearing.
Mhm. Right. Well, I mean, even when you're hearing something, you're still visualizing what you're hearing.
Yeah, that's true. That's so true. That is true. Yeah, so that's as far as creating the interview technical wise,
Mhm.
depending on what you're doing. I've been doing a lot of interviews with Zoom, and it is actually pretty good. I'm impressed. Even when it cuts out in Zoom, it's like the program has some sort of directions that tell it to kind of pick it back up, and it picks it up pretty good. Like it like you can cut out the blank spot, and usually it almost sounds like it didn't cut out. Like it kind of
Mhm.
picks it up in time. It's really interesting. Um, so you can record in Zoom, and when you record in Zoom, it always makes two files. It'll make an audio file and a visual file. So
Mhm.
you can actually go to your little Zoom folder and find it'll say audio only, and you can pull the audio only, and you can open it up and edit it with Audacity, and pull an interview, so that in that way you can interview people, from wherever anybody is at. You don't have
Mhm.
to have them in person necessarily. There's probably a few things I would say if you're doing an interview in the field. uh, One is to pay attention to what kind of microphone you have. An Omnoid microphone has a pattern that is like the entire area will be heard. You'll get a lot more room noise out of that compared to what they call a cardioid microphone. Oh, I got that backwards. Oh God. The
Mm.
Omnoid is the omnidirectional. I believe that is one direction, and the cardioid is the, yeah. Anyway, we use like Shure 58 microphone. Those microphones that I gave you that are the USB microphones, they're great. You just set them at a table. Try to keep them pretty close to who is speaking. If you have somebody who speaks very quietly compared to other people, keep, move it closer to your quiet person, and try to pay attention when you're looking at the waveform that you're creating. Notice if somebody is coming in super quiet compared to the rest of the group. And but those microphones are pretty friendly for sitting in a group of three people, but you want to be kind of close to do an in-person thing like that, because the farther away from your microphone you are, the more you are going to get room noise, because you are basically, if you're up close, your sound wave is going to be turned down, and it's going to be picking up your loud voice. but if you're farther back, you're going to have turned your volume up for your recording volume, and then everything comes up with it, of course, you know? So you'll get more of the room's noise if you have to turn it up, whereas you'll have it turned down if you're nice and close. And that
Right.
is pretty helpful to get a better quality. I would say, other things about interviewing. Basically, I like the Zoom for interviewing rather than like a phone interview, because you can see each other. And in some ways it becomes, at least it's not as personable as being with someone,
Mhm.
but it's more personable than not seeing their face. Which,
Right.
and you can do it. I mean, you can interview without seeing their face, but what I've witnessed in our group is that it seems like it works better. You get more of the visual cues for when to say something. Like if you don't see somebody's face and you're interviewing them and you're kind of just patiently waiting for them to finish saying, you know, their whatever they're saying, you don't as easily know when they're done. You
Mhm.
know.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, then you're just kind of
it's
waiting like, are you done
yeah.
or not done? Yeah.
And when I do it with multiple youth, I ask them to, I kind of prepare ahead of time. I tell, you know, what do you guys want to do? Do you want to alternate asking questions and go around in the circle and ask questions, or just, you know, if there's two people, one person then the other, and then back and forth? Does one of you want to take half the questions and then the other one does the other half? I like alternating it because the change in voices makes it more interesting to listen to. And so you
Mhm.
alternate your questions like that, having that, you know, set up ahead of time. What do I want? Who's going to do the intro? You know, who's going to do the outro? So that when it comes time to do that, and you can use the chat to help folks know what to do when, you know,
Mhm.
you can be like, you can also put the intro in writing in the chat for younger students. That's what we do. And, you know, we put the intro or the
That's
outro in the
yeah.
chat. Even the questions are nice to have in the chat,
Yeah.
you know? And so that's been pretty helpful for us as far as different ways to help the youth get through it, because you can help without having to speak up in the middle of their interview, because we are trying really hard to make it so that they get to facilitate the whole process as much as possible, you know.
Mhm.
Every once in a while you have to kind of come to their rescue if there's an you know. So
Right.
and so, which is okay. It's not, and usually it's super easy. If you hear somebody stumble on something, you know, sometimes it's okay. You can't control the ums. People are going to do that. The you knows. Oh man, you can't control people's language like that. You know, that's something you got to deal with in post. But if you hear somebody say some, especially if you're pre-recording, if you hear somebody reading their part or your interview say something that's important that is kind of stumbled through, you know, they misspoke or something, you can encourage them to, will you say that one more time, you know? And it's, you can easily and gently do that. And occasionally it's pretty important, because when I record PSAs with the youth, I always correct their pronunciations, and then they start the sentence over again, or whatever, so that, you know, that when we speaking of, you know, when you put it on the air, people can't even tell that ever happened, because they re-spoke it. Um, Asking ahead of time, that's something I knew. I'd think of other things. Ask somebody how they pronounce their name ahead of time. That is kind of important, and a good thing to do before you start recording the interview, so that, you know, you make that a little easier for the moment. Because if you mispronounce it, they either feel uncomfortable and don't want to tell you, or you know,
Mhm. Yeah.
and and so that it's good to ask them that ahead of time. Yeah, I feel like that's about it,
Yeah.
at the end of the Zoom it won't actually convert things till the end of the Zoom meeting, and then it will put it in the little Zoom folder, and you have to know where to
Hmm.
find it when it comes to
Hmm.
Zoom interviews.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna actually ask you about. So, where is that folder where I can find the audio? I haven't actually explored a Zoom in that way.
I think it automatically, actually, I'm pretty positive I'm looking right now on mine, and I'm sure this is where it automatically saves it into your documents folder. And it'll put a Zoom folder in your documents folder, and then you can go in there and see things, and they title them by the date. So, you'll see a folder that's titled by the date, and then when you open up the folder, uh, there'll be one file for each time you record. So if you record more than once, sometimes I turn off the record button and then I start it again. Maybe we got a funky start or something. You'll get two files. So make sure, you figure out which those are, and it'll come in with uh, two files, even when you only have one recording, and one will say audio only, and one will say Zoom 0 or Zoom 1 or whatever. It'll number them according to how many times you recorded during that session of Zoom. So that's, and you should be able to tell if like you've done a few and like you did some really short things that, for some reason, and then you recorded a long interview. Look at the size of the interview.
Yeah.
The size of the file will show you which one is the long one. So you don't have to search it out, as that's a tip for finding it. If you get too many of them in one Zoom meeting.
Okay. Perfect.
I think that's,
Yeah, I think that was the only question that I had.
yeah. And then, so I was trying to think, you were mentioning anything else that you would want to know, but I think that most of
Mhm.
it, we covered how to edit in the recording session, and then we covered how to put it into Dropbox in the other session. And I think that's pretty straightforward. And I discovered that you can interview musicians and they can play. Most of them are prepared to play music over Zoom these days because so many of
Oh
them are
wow.
using it as the way that they do their band rehearsals and everything to a certain degree. Some of them were using Zoom for that.
Hmm.
And I've done some interviews and then put their music live on the air, and it worked really well. I was just like, wow, it worked.
Yeah.
It's not a produced album quality, but
Right.
community
Yeah.
radio,
Hmm.
and I was really impressed at how beautifully it fit, to do that. We were going to do that with our last interview with, and we ended up with over an hour of interview. That's another thing to know, is that your show shouldn't be longer than either 28 minutes or 57 minutes. I think your guys is an hour long show, so 57
Yeah.
minutes for you. But
57. Okay.
um
Let me
uh
write that down just so that I
yeah, the
remember.
length of the show in
And
total,
then
because
you were recommending that if we did do an interview to keep it at 30 minutes.
yeah, or
Was
even
that what we did?
less.
Less?
An
Okay.
interview,
Because I couldn't I
honestly.
was trying to find how we broke it down, like time wise, so that we didn't go over
Oh
time.
yeah, the
And
pie
I
chart.
can't remember. Yeah, I can't find anywhere like the
Well,
image of
normally
it.
I normally recommend an interview be about 10 or 15 minutes. If
Okay.
for a half hour show, or 20-30 minutes for an hour show. So that, and then I think that's what we did, was an hour show. And that's why we said not more than 30 minutes. And then your other spots were like 10 minutes for music, 5 minutes for news, 5 minutes for BIPOC heroes segment, and then there was like 5 minutes for your intro and outro. And what do we have left in the hour? There's not much, maybe just transitions.
So it was 10 minutes for you, so it was 20 to 30 minutes for the interview.
Yeah, I think it was 20 to 30 minutes for the interview,
Okay.
30 minutes tops, so that you guys could fit the 10 minutes for music, 5 minutes for BIPOC Heroes, 5 minutes for news, 5 minutes for announcements. That was it.
Okay, news
And
and
then five
announcements.
minutes for your intro and outro.
Okay.
2 minutes on each end, and then the extra minute is probably ate up with the transitions that take you from each of those things to one another. You know what I mean? That's what the 5 minutes was for, an intro and outro, and the process of transitioning from section to section takes a few not long, but I'm pretty sure that is what we split that pie chart up like.
Okay.
And then we said that all of those, and of course, technically it's
There
supposed
you
to end up 57 minutes. So somewhere a few minutes has to be pulled off of there. Actually, I'm just realizing, but
go.
that's
Okay.
a guesstimate of what I remembered it looking like.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure that we'll be able to. I just couldn't remember like roughly what it was, so this
Yeah,
helps me. So
yeah,
then we
perfect,
can
perfect,
organize something for sure.
nice.
And now that I have all this.
Yeah, that's perfect. And it's the way we did it was that it was really flexible, because if you make a shorter show, we just let the music play at the end. All of your guys' music choices
Mhm.
would just play at the end. So you're not like it doesn't have to be exact times, which some, when you get into more and more professional radio stuff, they get more critical about stuff like that, but we try really hard to make it an easy process where even our adult producers can, have a song or an instrumental at the end and not have to make it exactly this time, which is tough actually to get your stuff to all end at exactly 57 seconds or so, or 57 minutes. So we don't ask for that. I would err on the side of shortness, because I will tell you right now, it is much harder to take stuff away than it is to just end up with your show being a little short.
Mhm.
That has been my experience, and it's easy for things to go over, but you don't want the end of the show to get cut off. So it's hard to figure out what to delete once you've got a big, long, awesome interview, because you're like, I love it all. It's like hard to pick what about what they shared is what I'm going to get rid of. So, yeah, I feel like that's about it. I think that might be all I have for now. Maybe I will say goodbye and turn off the recording.
Okay.